guitar like I'm on my tiptoes, baby. You think a little too small. I got big goals, baby. Hey, where the money?
What's going on, everybody? Welcome into the Blazers Edge podcast. I'm your host, Danny Marang. And, well, it was going to be a mailbag Monday, but nope. Shout out Neil Olshey, Adrian Wojnarowski, Chris Haynes, and everybody else just forcing news down our throats for the entirety of Sunday night. I'm here with the one, the only, the now glassesless
Glassesless.
Shout out LASIK.
Shout out to LASIK. So check this out. Actually, so I did it about 3 months ago. I did a LASIK about 3 months ago. First of all, I paid for about half of it with Top Shot money. During that boom, I was. Yeah, I mean, I cashed out like while it was big, and so I already.
Didn't you turn like $50 into like $2,000?
35 into $2,000.
There you go.
But I go out there. And the place that I got, my eye doctor referred me to this place. The first thing I see out there at his office, I went out for my pre-op consultation. The first thing I see are framed jerseys on the walls of Steve Blake, Channing Frye, Greg Oden. They were all like had messages in it that said like, "Thanks for fixing my like." And then I looked it up, and Channing Frye became a 40% 3-point shooter when he got to Portland.
There you go.
So
he's gonna fix your 3-point game.
I think it's going to take more than that to fix my 3-point game, but
that's apparently where our crossroads exists right now, because the doctor who's dealing with my ankle is actually the Blazers doctor. So it's a shout out to having good health care, I think, at this point in time.
Well, I paid for all of mine out of pocket.
Oh, see, listen, man, that's the next step. I'm team contacts for life right now. I got to find a way to get the LASIK or the PRP or whatever the other one is.
It's all the same thing.
Listen,
dude, if you can afford it, you got to do it, man. It's been like life changing for me.
Yeah, I would love to, because I am terrible about leaving my contacts in. But speaking of seeing straight, there's a lot of folks that can't right now.
This is a professional segue by Dan here.
That's what I am, professional segwayman. The years I spent alongside Joe Simons, that's what I get right there. But we're sitting here. It's now 9:20 at night, Sunday night. I believe all of the bombs have been dropped. Chauncey Billups is the Trailblazers' new head coach, officially. The press release has been put out by the team.
Yep.
Both Haynes and Woj have dropped their respective stories. I think we'll start there and then kind of work our way back over the last 72 hours. What are your initial thoughts? We'll just call it initial thoughts. I think we'll go with that.
Well, I can't say that I'm surprised at who the head coach ended up being, because you and I both know that basically for several months, like not even just during the search and since they let Terry Stotts go, but going back several months, Neil Olshey has been set on hiring Chauncey Billups.
It's been a poorly kept secret.
It's a you know what it reminds me of? And I mean, this search took a little bit longer than the Bulls search did.
I knew you were going to go Garpax on this one.
But when I was on the Bulls beat, after the 2014-15 season, after they lost that second round series to the Cavs, they fired Tom Thibodeau. And I sat there at the press conference with Gar and Pax, and they said, like, we're going to undertake a national coaching search and leave no stone unturned. We have a wide list of candidates. We haven't started to reach out to anybody yet. And then 72 hours later, Woj was reporting the years and money on Fred Hoiberg's contract, and it had been well established that Gar Forman had been an assistant coach at Iowa State when Fred played there, and Gar bought Fred's house from him when he got traded to Indiana.
Yeah.
Or to Minnesota, rather. So it was kind of a similar thing. And again,
draw the line here for everybody that doesn't know between Neil and Chauncey.
The difference here is that they at least went through the motions of interviewing other candidates. Obviously, Becky Hammond got a lot of attention as a candidate. Mike D'Antoni got a couple rounds of interviews. There were a few other people whose names were in the mix. But Chauncey Billups was on the Clippers when Neil Olshey was the GM, because he was the GM in 2011. He traded for Chris Paul, and then he picked Chauncey up off of the amnesty waivers as Chris Paul's backup, as like a veteran, to be like the veteran backup and like locker room guy. And since then, the year after that, he takes the Portland job. He drafts Dame. This whole run starts. Over that entire time, going back to before Dame's rookie year, Neil, anytime he's asked about it, will talk about how much Dame reminds him of Chauncey Billups, both as a player and as a leader, as like a locker room guy in terms of his demeanor and in terms of the effect he has on other guys. That's been something that Neil has hammered home for 9 years about how Dame is the new Chauncey Billups, and having somebody like that is transformative for your locker room and for your culture. And so it didn't surprise me at all when I heard that that's who Neil was leaning towards. When you think about like the parallels with him and Dame make sense, but also if there's one thing we know about Neil Olshey, it's that he loves getting guys that he either drafted or wanted to sign as free agents a year before, or
Neil Olshey always
whatever
gets
the
his
case
man.
may be. He always gets his man, whether it's years later or. So that was my that's been my thought this entire time. Like ever since they let Terry Stotts go, I basically, whenever I would do radio interviews or be podcasts or whatever else and be asked about this, what I always said was, if you were choosing Chauncey Billups or the field, bet on Chauncey Billups. Yeah. And there could always be something that comes out of left field. Maybe ownership has their own ideas. We have heard that Jody Allen was pushing Becky Hammon pretty hard. And, she was really invested in, she wanted to be the team that hired the first woman head coach. And she had multiple rounds of interviews. And so it was just going to be a question of whether Neil Olshey or Jody Allen was making the final call. And if Neil was making the final call, it was never going to be anybody besides Chauncey. And so that was, kind of my thought. And then you get into all of this other stuff with Chauncey Billups, which complicates it. Because if the 97 lawsuit that was settled out of court in 2000 didn't exist, we're talking about, okay, the process wasn't great in terms of they didn't really have a lot of serious candidates and Neil was centering his guy the whole time. But the pedigree is there to suggest that Chauncey's probably going to be a decent head coach. He was obviously very respected as a player, and he's on a coaching staff now with the Clippers that made the conference finals. And, he's been offered head coaching jobs or front office jobs in the past. Like, if it weren't for the off-court stuff and for the stuff in his past and the allegations, you could talk yourself into this being a good hire, but
pretty easily.
Yeah, you could say, okay, sometimes these assistants who have never been a head coach before, sometimes it's Luke Walton, but sometimes you get Ty Lue winning a championship his first year in Cleveland, or Nick Nurse winning a championship his first year in Toronto. Like, sometimes that's what you get. But then, you get to the allegations, which I'm going to be totally honest here. The Jason Kidd stuff, everybody's known about forever. Like that stuff's been pretty out in the open. And that's why even when Dame stumped for him right after they fired Stotts, I always knew Kidd was going to be a non-starter because the backlash was just going to be so strong. And also, I don't think Neil was ever going to consider somebody who has a history of trying to execute power grabs at other places that he's worked.
Not just that, it's the Ray Rice situation.
Yeah.
It's one thing to hear about it, but when there's photos,
right,
that's what makes it real in, I think, the public's eyes. Whether or not that's how it should or shouldn't be, it's a different discussion. But when
there's also the fact that, and this is not the same category of offense, whatever, but like Kidd also,
and there's criminal charges that were filed.
Kidd also he was convicted. B, like, he has more recent DUIs, and he's also I don't know, like the Kidd thing I knew was a non-starter because everybody kind of knows about his stuff. And
then Dallas.
That organization is its own thing. They clearly have no issues bringing in people with any of that kind of stuff. We kind of know what all that is. But even I, as somebody who lives and breathes this stuff, and it's my job to follow this stuff, I had no idea
the Chauncey
Billups case until about a month ago when his name started being connected to these head coaching jobs, and somebody on Twitter. Well, right, you know what I mean. Like, right when his name first started getting floated out by,
I think it was Anthony Doyle who sent it to me the first time, and I was like, "I'm sorry, what?"
I don't remember who sent it to me or where I saw it first, but somebody on Twitter posted it, and that was the first time I was aware of it. Yeah. And even then, I read through it, and I was like, "Well, this isn't good. The details here are pretty bad." But they'll probably be able to explain away something that happened 20 years ago. That's probably something they'll be able, just because it's the kind of thing where they'll be able to say, look, it was a long time ago. They settled out of court. It's not going to get as much of a widespread backlash as the Jason Kidd stuff did. And then he actually emerged as like the
favorite.
The favorite to land the job. And then you couldn't really not talk about it anymore, especially when, and we can debate how serious Becky Hammon was or wasn't as a candidate, but throwing her out there, because remember the first leak of candidates came right after the Kidd thing blew up in Dame's face, and it was Becky Hammon and Dawn Staley both on the list. And my thought at the time was, they're going to obviously hire Chauncey Billups, but that was smart of them to throw two women on the list as a PR move.
Yeah.
And so the fact that then, they make this whole show of, look, Becky Hammon got a second interview. She's the first woman to advance to the final stages of the coaching career. And then you hire somebody who has something like this in their past after using the woman candidate as basically a PR shield.
Yeah.
It's not what you want to see. It's not great.
For an organization, and here's the thing, I am not crucifying Dame for not knowing about Kidd. I genuinely, you look at how old Dame is.
I was told at the time that Dame didn't know about
Dame
the
did
Kidd
not
stuff.
know. Yes, that's, and I think
I believe him on that.
I do too. He was 7 years old when it happened.
Yeah,
like I get it. Like it's because here's the thing: for everybody's like, well, he's in that world. Do you think people in that world spend a lot of time talking about their darkest hours?
No.
Like they don't. Like,
and even with the Billups one, because that
you and
one
I
was
live and
settled.
breathe this stuff, and we had never heard.
A, we didn't know about it. B,
word.
Something like that was settled out of court, and you can for a lot of players, and I was covering the Bulls when the Derrick Rose stuff was going on too. Yeah. A lot of players, and this is not good that they view it this way, but I'm just kind of explaining how players view this. A lot of players view this as, we make a lot of money. We have women trying to get money out of us. Like a lot of players, kind of, and so when they see like something like that in somebody else's past, they probably don't really give it a second thought.
They compartmentalize that completely differently.
They compartmentalize it. I also can't imagine anybody is like going back and reading the medical examiner report for something that was 23 years ago.
Yeah. Especially if it's not something that pertains to you.
Right. And like there's no reason Dame would have had to and I don't know. I think the Dame stuff, I think that him getting into it on Twitter and like on social media this past couple of days
misstep
was an unforced error by him.
Yeah.
The dude that he was quote tweeting yesterday that set off the whole thing is some dude that has 200 followers, wasn't even tweeting at him. I don't even know how he found that tweet. Somebody must have sent it to him and he decided to quote tweet it. I think he's spending a little bit too much time on Twitter. And like, if you're not, I did appreciate him coming out and saying, I wasn't aware of their histories at the time, and I don't support those things. But unless you're prepared to come out and say, I wasn't aware of it, but now that I know that, I don't want him to be the coach.
Yeah.
Like that, if you're going to be Dame and you're going to come out and make a statement at all, that's what you have to do. And if he wanted to just completely stay out of it and say, this is all Neil's thing, that's not really, that would be his prerogative. But he's already on record saying that he likes Chauncey as a head coach. Whether that was damage control after the Kidd thing blew up in his face or not, who can say? But it's all just, there's one common denominator to all of this, and it's Neil Olshey doing what Neil Olshey wants to do and what Neil Olshey always wanted to do. And really, and I said this earlier on Twitter. I maybe didn't phrase it great. I might phrase it better if I end up putting it in the column that I'm probably going to write after the press conference on Tuesday. If this whole thing is part of what drives Dame to eventually ask out, it won't be because some dude with 200 followers tweeted at him like the Chris Haynes story implied. It'll be because Neil Olshey put him in the position to take all the hits for it when Neil
failed to build a roster around him.
Failed to build a roster around him, but also put him in a position where he's the one that has to publicly take all the hits for the Chauncey Billups hire when it was Neil's guy the whole time.
Yeah, this is what you and I and others have talked about for months. If Neil Olshey was able to get a guy like Chauncey, a first-time head coach, one of his guys, is that it would give him a shield. Because if let's go pie in the sky and they land Spoelstra and somehow Neil is still on board.
I don't think that would have been the
case. No, but let's just.
I think if the Spolster stuff had happened, I don't think Neil would still be.
Gone. I think
the idea about that, at least the way I understand it.
Let's take it a step lower. Let's say that the compromise was made and they signed D'Antoni. They go with MDA and they bring in some player-friendly assistant head coaches like a Fizdale.
Sure.
Let's say that's the compromise. If all of a sudden they don't make a bunch of roster moves and you've got a guy in D'Antoni who is taken a team to a conference finals and made his point guards multiple-time MVPs, you can't point at the coach. You can't. You can't point at the coach because it's no longer a coaching issue because you've got a wildly successful coach. And for all of the we need somebody to hold somebody accountable defense, all that kind of stuff, whatever. Like,
that Houston team was pretty good defensively that year that they made the conference.
12th or 13th. Like, it was good enough. Like, if you're right around top 10, you're fine, especially when you've got an MVP.
Yeah.
But that's the thing is, like, Neil would not be able to do that. And the last card to be played was basically him being run out of town. And I think that's where if you get Damian Lillard in that position with a young rookie head coach, you can say, you can use a one-off year. You probably buy yourself an additional year at bare minimum if things don't add up, because you can say, it's a rookie coach, still working through it, this, that, and the other.
Well, I'll take it a step further for you, Dan. This is why I don't believe that Neil is going to trade CJ. Mm-hmm. Because trading CJ will always be the next card that you can have to play.
Why play it now when you don't have to?
If there's one thing that Neil is always looking for, this has been consistent throughout his entire time in Portland, it's somebody else to blame besides himself. We saw it at that press conference 2 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. We've seen it. We saw it after the sweep against New Orleans. We've seen it basically we saw it after like LaMarcus Aldridge left and Batum and all them. There's always got to be somebody else to blame. So if this year doesn't work out, then next year you do the CJ trade, and then if the team still isn't very good, then you maybe look at the coach. That buys Neil 2 more years.
Yeah,
and that's kind of how he's approaching this. That's always how he approaches any of this stuff.
That's the crazy thing. And going back to the Billups thing, and then I want to touch on the overarching coaching hire process and fans and all that stuff. The Billups hire, because I don't want to gloss over the ugly side of this without mentioning it. Like, Sean and I aren't talking about it in that sense because it's not our place to talk about it. We're highlighting it, acknowledging it. It's not good, but I don't think that it's our place to litigate that. Would you agree?
I have no interest in going through the details of the case and deciding whether I think that Chauncey Billups is guilty or not. I am only really qualified to say that it's not great that this is in his past, that as a thing that even came up, and that there's plenty of perfectly good coaches they could have hired that don't have something like this.
And that's exactly it. That's what I have been consistent with on social media and Twitter, is that I haven't said a word about Chauncey as a coach or as a person or as a human being or as
with any of these. Well, as a coach, the thing is with any of these assistants who have never been a head coach before, you always don't know. Just guessing whether they're going to be good or not.
I've reached out to people with the Clippers, and they did not make Chauncey Billups available to media members, and they didn't allow him to be. He wasn't an accessible guy. You throw COVID on top of it, and the fact that the Clippers really didn't make anybody accessible at all to anything. They kind of run things similar to the Blazers in that regard.
I've heard that too.
And you don't know you don't know if is he going to run an up-tempo scheme, or is he going to run aggressive trapping defense? You just don't know. And so, like I said, I've reached out and I've asked him questions about who, what, when, where, why, but it's all guesswork. So that's why, for my personal sake, I haven't said I think Chauncey's going to be a bad coach. My whole thing was, and will maintain to be, if I was an owner, if I was a GM, if I was a president, there are candidates out there who I would otherwise be looking at because I don't believe the risk is worth the reward. And you look at, and I have had a couple people ask me what I don't believe in it. I just don't think it's that's exactly what what it comes down to. It's more about
my thing is more.
There's other candidates.
Yeah, my thing is more. I don't want to sit here and be the one that says that nobody can ever improve from things that they've done in the past, or that, he should never be allowed to work in the NBA again. If I were running an organization, I wouldn't want it to be my organization that was the one that decided to hire him and take on all the PR stuff. Somebody else can do that if they want.
Yeah, and I think we're fundamentally in the same place. There's other individuals that are out there. You have the Teresa Witherspoons, you have the Jamal Mosleys, you have the Darvin Hams, the Jaron Collinses, like
Ime Udoka, Portland guy.
There's plenty of names that were out there. Like if you're trying to, let's say that the Blazers are trying to do something good in the sense of bringing in minority candidates, whether it be women, whether it be black coaches, there's no shortage of them.
There's plenty of them out there. Darvin Ham has been out there. I mean, although you know what, I will say that, and I don't have the details off the top of my head, there is, not to the extent of Billups, but there is something in Darvin Ham's
that's the unfortunate part, is there is more of the stuff
there's
out there.
There's a lot more of this stuff out there than I think people realize. But Ime Udoka, Jamal Mosley, Wes Unseld Jr.
Yeah. There's not a shortage of young former player black coaches sitting on benches right now as assistant coaches. Like there's just not. There's plenty of those guys if you want to give them an opportunity.
But none of them played for the Clippers when Neil was the GM there. So therefore, none of them are as qualified as him.
That's the short list.
That was the whole criteria for the job.
All right, let's flip it past Chauncey. I don't want to make it a laughing matter. It's more of just you can kind of see this writing on the wall.
Yeah.
But I hoped that things were going to go a different way, just because, again, I don't think the risk is worth the reward.
And by the way, we should also just say, you and I have both talked to women who are both diehard Blazers fans who have spent a lot of money on tickets and jerseys and whatever else, and even people who work for the team or in the organization in some capacity, who are not happy about this, and they don't like the message that it sends that that the team was willing to hire a coach who has this sort of thing in their past. And I think that, the fact that, Neil could have, what they could have done before they made obviously now they've sent out the press release, they have the press conference coming. It's a little bit too late to turn back now, but what they could have done sometime today or yesterday was see what the reaction was, and then just say, okay, we messed up. We didn't read the room. Let's go a different direction. Let's offer the job to Mike D'Antoni or Becky Hammond or something.
I thought they would. When they announced the press conference without the name attached to it, I genuinely thought that's what they were doing.
As soon as this evening, I was talking to somebody who was saying that they didn't know if he was going to be the coach on opening night.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of
somebody who would have a pretty good read of that too.
Yeah. And the fact that they're just going through with it, I know there are a lot of people inside and outside the organization who are not happy about it, and justifiably so.
It's gonna be an interesting 36 hours between now and then that press conference, which
they picked a hell of a time, by the way, to have their first in-person press conference since the start of COVID. By just as an aside, I have to drive out there tomorrow to take a PCR test so that I can go to the press conference on Tuesday. But that's going to be like Neil can't do, because usually, you've been on some of these Zooms during the season.
You can't mute when you're in the same room.
Well, so here's but the way it usually worked during the season, when it was just like a post game or pre-game thing, they would have the Zoom on the collage view where, you could see everybody's faces, and then they call on you, and then you unmute your own mic and you ask your question. When Neil did his end of season presser, they did it in webinar format. So not only could he not see any of our faces, none of our cameras are on, but you had no control over whether you were muted or not. They would just call on you and unmute you. Neil can't do that now. Yeah,
everybody's in the room. So, and like I said, you'll be there. There'll be some couple others there, and I'm very interested to see how the questions go. And as far as how they're directed, I think they're going to go one of two ways. They're going to go specifically pointed questions about Chauncey Billups. The other part of this is they're going to be very pointed and direct questions about Damian Lillard and his future here with the Portland Trailblazers. And that's what we're going to kind of pivot to here. Obviously, Chris Haynes put his tweet/article out. The first paragraph, I think, just sets everything up. The enormous backlash in the Portland Trailblazers process to hire a new coach and his concerns on whether a championship contender can be built to become factors that may push the franchise player, Damian Lillard, out the door, league sources told Yahoo Sports. So that's not just the Chauncey kid stuff. That's the coaching and what, Sean?
Putting it on the roster, but also, putting it on the fans for tweeting at Dame about it.
Yeah, so let's take this piece by piece. We've kind of already touched on the coaching stuff. You and I are both on the same page. Dame likely very much unaware of the past histories of both Kidd and Billups. I have heard, and I think you have heard the same note, that there has been some conflicting reports as far as how invested Damian Lillard was in this entire process.
I did hear that he was on the Zoom for the coaching interviews.
Yes, and he was on the Zoom, but does that mean he's sitting there taking notes, challenging questions, or is he just interested in who his potential head coach can be? And I think that's something that those things can vary as far as what very interested means. Is Dame saying ultimately yes or no? I don't think that that's the case. I think he has a serious amount of input, but this is still Jody, Chris McGowan, and Neil O'Shea and Burt Gold. Those are the guys who are ultimately going to sign off on this, even if Neil is the one calling the shots, that still has to be signed off on. Dame has asked for personnel decisions that have not happened in the past. He has suggested names that have not happened in the past. This is very much the same situation. I bet you Damian Lillard was very invested in personnel decisions in the past in the same level that we're talking about personally invested in this coaching hire.
Right, and he has said before that when it comes to his investment in personnel decisions, he doesn't go to the front office and say, trade this guy for this guy or do any of that because he's friends with all of his teammates and he doesn't want to put himself in a position where he has to ask them to trade away somebody on the team.
Because he genuinely likes everybody.
Right. But he also has said that they ask him to name some players that he likes that are free agents or guys they could trade for, and he gives his input. That's kind of about the normal level of input that a star could have and that's why going back to the coaching search stuff, that's why I was kind of blown away that he put on the record that he wanted Jason Kidd, because I've never seen LeBron come out and say, this is the coach I want my team to hire. I've never seen Kevin Durant do that. I've never seen Kawhi Leonard do that. I've never seen Kyrie Irving, any of these guys who have been the faces of the so-called player empowerment era. None of them have gone on the record with a reporter and said, this is the coach that I want my team to hire.
And then
so Dame can't really, and so Dame, well, right, yeah. Then the kid thing blew up in his face, and that's why in this Chris Haynes report, that the coaching search was conducted by Neil O'Shea. None of the candidates were suggestions from Lillard. Lillard played no part in consummating. Dame is on record as getting involved in the coaching search and trying to get involved in it. So him now as much as yes, it was Neil O'Shea's hire, and Neil O'Shea was always going to hire Chauncey Billups. Putting it out there that, Dame had absolutely no part in the coaching search at all, I think is a little bit disingenuous also.
Yeah, like I said, I think Dame and his camp have had some missteps in this process. And I think him throwing out Kidd was, my impression has been the whole time, was someone he knew, someone he's familiar with, somebody he could flex his muscle, and without the benefit of knowing about his past,
right,
it would not be detrimental. If they went another way, it would be just fine. But it was an easy way for him to, because he's never flexed his muscle like that publicly in any way. The closest he had come was a month before, when he had leaked something through Haynes about potentially being unhappy about some things. That was the most we had ever heard. So I thought that was his first time of really just flexing his muscle. And that's what I interpreted that as. But I think him and his camp, they had a misstep.
They should have vetted Jason Kidd.
Yes.
Which is not obscure. This stuff is very easy to Google. This
that
stuff has
one
been brought
especially
up a lot.
Yes.
Jason Kidd is I mean, the Chauncey one, like anybody could be forgiven for not knowing
Yeah.
about that. The Jason Kidd one, it's pretty hard not to know about if you follow the NBA at all.
And that's why I think he may have gotten some bad advice. But let's get beyond that, which I think none of this is obviously good. But the realization that, did the clock just start on Damian Lillard's time in Portland?
I think the clock started on Damian Lillard's time in Portland after Game 5 of the Denver series, when they, he had one of the greatest playoff performances of all time, and they still lost to a team that was starting like Austin Rivers and Facundo Campazzo.
Yeah.
I think that was, the final straw for when Dame looked around and it was like, literally, there's not anything more I could have done, and we still can't beat a team that has like 3 of their 4 best players injured in the first round. And I think Dame was looking at the one guy that has made it very much a priority to make sure nobody ever blames for anything, and saying, hey, maybe this is not the guy that should be building the team. And then as the coaching search went on, and I mean, there were certain scenarios that those who know where maybe Neil wouldn't have been in the picture anymore. None of those ever ended up coming together. And now Dame is looking around like, hey, if this is just what it's going to be, Neil got his guy. He's not going to lose any of his power anytime soon. What am I still doing here?
Yeah. And that's an unfortunate position to be in with a guy who was given now 9 years. And is
9 years, and basically built his whole brand around, I'm the guy that's going to stay in one place my whole career and not go and run and join a super team and
not run from the grind.
Make fun of Paul George on Instagram for running from the grind. Like that's and that's not something Dame necessarily needs to be held to as an entire career. I just think it's pretty funny that he has basically built his entire brand on that.
Yeah.
And now, because he's looking around and seeing that, the GM that has been in charge his entire career is clearly not able to build a contender, he's looking around and is like, you know what, if I'm going to be this loyal, you guys got to give me something back. You got to work with me here a little bit.
Yeah. Which is entirely fair.
100%. I wouldn't blame Dame at all if he asked for a trade tomorrow.
Here's the thing. You look around at all the other small market teams, and everybody talks about how difficult it is to build in a small market, and it is. And I'm not trying to say that building a team is an easy thing. It is very difficult.
Are you saying, Dan, that free agents don't want to come to Portland?
Really?
Because that's something that Neil O'Shea really, really, really likes to point out. That's his number one thing that he loves to point to whenever anybody criticizes any of his roster moves of any kind, even if it's not a free agent signing. He'll just be like, look, free agents just don't want to come to Portland.
Which I think we all accept as a known reality.
Sure, but he loves to point that out. Yeah. He really loves to use that as a shield.
And that's the thing.
There's always a shield that he can use for something.
Yes, and then we have seen in multiple small markets where multiple stars have been traded. Oklahoma City has traded for numerous stars in the past years.
Paul George re-signed in Oklahoma City after being traded there when everybody thought it was just a 1-year rental and he was going to go to the Lakers.
They have managed to do it everywhere except for Portland, and I think that's the problem. You look at Utah's a small market. They have multiple all-stars, and they've traded for multiple and signed multiple free agents who have turned into very, very good players. They have traded for very capable players. You look at Phoenix; they made a move.
Chris Paul wanted to go there specifically.
Yes, because of how well they have done with things. And
Phoenix isn't a small market by market size, but they're not like it's not
like a 6th or 7th. Yeah, it's
right,
actually,
but it's not.
Yeah.
But it's not L.A., New York, Miami.
No,
Golden State.
The TV household markets are not the same. The population center is huge,
right?
But the TV market share is not the same. But again, you look at markets around the league that are small, and they've been successful in bringing players here, and Neil O'Shea has not delivered a single player of consequence that matters outside of LaMarcus Aldridge, and he did not deliver him. He was here. That's it. Like, I like Norm. He's a good player. They've drafted relatively well. They've signed some good guys, but those are the moves that you make after your foundation is set. And I think that's something that when you look at every star currently in the NBA, if you look at every top 10 guy, they have all played with all-stars. They have played with multiple tiers of all-stars. Jimmy Butler has been on 3 different teams where he's played with multiple all-stars. Like, that's It's just it's hard to fathom that they have failed to build a team this badly. And it's by the skin of their teeth with Damian Lillard and with some good moves on the edges that they are right here. They are a good team. They are not a great team, and that has been the calling card for this team throughout their tenure at post LaMarcus Aldridge.
And I think they make the conference finals in 2019. Mm-hmm. And after that happened, Neil signs his extension, Terry signs his extension, Dame signs the Supermax.
Yep.
And that's really like when Dame, I remember he sat there at exit interviews and he was talking about how this run just proves that if you just stick with it, maybe some breaks will go your way and you can make a run. I think now, 2 years later,
the realization
he's realizing that run, even, without Nurk, like that was the breaks that they were going to get. And with this group and this core, like it's just not going to happen for him. And I don't think anything is going to happen unless they make a major move, like a trade CJ and Nurk level, shakeup. And I don't think Neil's going to do that because Neil drafted CJ and he's the guy that Neil can take credit for. So I don't think Neil really wants to trade CJ unless his hand is forced.
So speaking of force and hands, I think this is the easy transition is when we're talking about personnel.
Okay.
You've got Chauncey. He's your head coach now. We don't know what he's going to be as far as a head coach. We don't know what he's going to do as far as a scheme. Do you think swapping out Chauncey for Terry Stotts changes the calculus for this team enough to matter?
I don't know enough about what his coaching philosophy is or any of that. I know that Neil, again, going back to when I was on the Bulls beat, that front office and that organization was so, they had such a personal distaste for Tom Thibodeau that they thought that firing him and bringing in Fred Hoiberg and keeping the roster the exact same was going to have like a Mark Jackson to Steve Kerr level transformative effect. And it did not. I don't think that, let's say they keep most of this roster the same. I don't think that bringing in Chauncey Billups to replace Terry Stotts is going to make those Enes Kanter, Carmelo Anthony minutes good defensive units. I don't think it's going to make. I don't think it's going to help their defense overall. I don't think just doing that. I think just running back the same personnel is going to just say, oh well, now suddenly this team is a title contender when they were a 8 seed or like a borderline play-in team with Terry Stotts.
And I think that's a bigger problem than swapping out coaches. And I don't want it to be this way, but I almost hope it is in the sense, and this is going to fire up plenty of people. I just don't care.
Oh, but the teams are going to be all over you.
Yeah, I know. And I hope it falls on its face early so that we don't delay, because I think there is a good chance that Olshey sticks by his guns now and the core of this team ends up coming back, because he was so adamant in that press conference about how it wasn't the roster, it's not the roster, and this is him getting a chance, essentially a free pass to prove that it wasn't the roster. And there's not a world that exists where I think coaching is going to change what this team is.
Maybe in the sense of it was time for a fresh voice.
Yeah, in that regard, and like tweaking around the edges.
That I understand, because
every bit of it.
I said from the whole time about the Stotts thing, I understand why they decided to go in a different direction. Mm-hmm. He was, until Rick Carlisle stepped down, he was the 4th longest tenured coach in the league. And the other 3 who were longer tenured than him were Pop, Spo, and Carlisle. And they had all had won championships, and Terry had made 1 conference finals in 9 years. I understood the decision for that. I just don't think that if you just change out the coach and keep this exact same roster the way it is, especially now that it's pretty obvious that Dame realizes that this roster isn't what it needs to be in order for them to contend. I don't think that's going to work out the way that Neil wants it to. But I mean, as long as he gets to keep his job, I think that's kind of the priority.
Well, we're talking about roster construction, and that means it's tampering season.
Oh, hell yeah.
Tampering season is the best season.
When's it ever not tampering season, though?
It's tampering season all around, but very rarely do you get 12 of the best players, 11 of the best players in Kevin Love on one team.
I knew that was going to be where you would go. Hey, you know what though? You know what though? Maybe he's a buy. Maybe the Cavs buy him out. And then the homecoming. Who's to say?
I am 100% on record. If your buyout candidate, if Kevin Love gets bought out, and I know those discussions have taken place, if he gets bought out, I would.
He clearly doesn't want to be in Cleveland anymore.
Yeah, I would unequivocally. If he comes here and takes the Melo minutes, 100%, because he's gonna shoot threes, he's gonna rebound, he's gonna pass the ball. Like it just. You know what you're going to get from him. That's fine. If he wants to be the vet minimum guy and come back and chill in Lake Oswego, no problem. He can throw on his jorts and have his puppies, and I will love all of the Kevin Love IG content. I will be all about that life. But
so are you saying you don't want Carmelo Anthony back, Dan?
Listen, if there was one reason I wanted Mike D'Antoni, it was the guarantee that Melo was not going to be back.
I think it's written in the stars that Melo is going to go back to New York and finish out his career there.
Yeah.
Now that they're like that team, because I think he didn't want to go back last summer or last offseason. It wasn't the summer; it was like November. But like last offseason, because it looked like the Knicks were going to be rebuilding. Now they're a playoff team. He might be down.
It would be a night. Listen, I would enjoy Carmelo Anthony significantly more not on the team that I'm covering. I will say that with just a big smile on my face. But it's not just Kevin Love that's on this Olympic team. Draymond Green, big time fan of Damian Lillard.
That's a mutual admiration society thing.
Yes.
I think Dame has been pretty openly trying to get Draymond to Portland for a while.
And so have, I would say, Dame's representation. It's been pretty open about that. And I think that's something Draymond would actually be okay with.
Yeah. I think he kind of understands that, this is probably the best year Steph is going to have at this point in his career. This past year, Klay is coming back from 2 consecutive season-ending leg injuries. I think that because Klay is a standstill shooter and he doesn't really have he isn't a guy. He's like a Zach LaVine who's like relies on his athleticism, or a Derrick Rose when he had his ACL. He'll probably be fine, but I think Draymond might be at the point where he's okay with the idea of not playing his entire career in Golden State.
Yeah, which, hey, under the right,
he already got the bag.
Yeah, exactly. He got the bag. He got the rings. Now it's about going where he wants to go and play. He wants to play with. I am on record as I would be okay with Draymond under the right circumstances. I think you need to thread a pretty tight needle to make that happen, because I am genuinely terrified that his athleticism is going to fall off a cliff almost immediately.
You know what, though? Okay, I hear you. Physically, I hear you.
Mentally, he's one of the smartest guys in the league.
I think he is so smart that he's going to be able to figure out. Like this year, even this year in Golden State, like he's basically a non-factor as a scorer, but the Warriors were still so much better when he was on the floor because he was a distributor and
he's a playmaking savant,
and he can set screens and all this other stuff. And I think after the Chris Haynes story today, you want to do whatever you can to make Dame happy so that he doesn't end up asking out. And one thing that I know will make Dame happy is getting Draymond Green. I don't know how you would do that. I haven't really gone through all the permutations of it in the trade machine to see what it might look like or how that might work. But
you can combine some things. Like you could go Covington, Derek Jones Jr. in a pick. That works, I believe, financially.
Yeah, there's things you can do. I don't know. I don't know about Golden State's like openness to doing that, but
I think at this point in time, if he asked, I think it would probably be something that they'd likely do, because their tax bill is such a burden that if they were able to get relatively decent value on expirings, they'd have
and then a few smaller pieces that then you can trade for other stuff and break some of that up.
And that's where like a $12 million or a $14 million 12 to 14, the Covington deal, Derek Jones Jr. opts in, that's another $10 million. You sweeten it with a pick or a young player. All of a sudden that starts to make sense for a team that's going to pay like $200 million for this roster next year.
Yeah, but if you want to salvage things with Dame, which clearly should be priority number one for the organization right now, that's one thing you can do.
And here's the other thing. Does adding talent like a Ben Simmons, does that make sense for them? Would it be better for them to I don't know the answer to this. Is it better for them to go for Draymond, a guy that Dame is very tight with? Is it better for them to go with probably a guy who's a little bit more talented in Ben Simmons? I don't know which side of that fence I fall on, but I think those are the kind of things you have to consider, right?
On a pure on-court basketball standpoint, the idea of Dame and Simmons together is incredible. And
Terrifying.
I think that would be something you would pursue. The thing that I would have a question about with that,
the work ethic and the personality.
that stuff. And I think Dame has already had this with Nurkic, and to a lesser extent Mo Harkless, who he has had to keep, motivated at different points. And I think at earlier points in Dame's career, I think he's been, more willing to embrace that stuff and be patient with that stuff. It's pretty clear right now that he's kind of over it as far as having to babysit guys and having to make sure that guys work on their game. And as talented as Ben Simmons is, Ben Simmons would be, if they traded for Ben Simmons, he would be the most talented player that Dame has ever played with.
Yeah.
But the personality side of it and the work ethic side of it, I don't know if that's I don't know if at this point in his career, as talented as Dame is, I don't think, or as talented as Simmons is, I don't think Dame really wants another project like that.
Yeah, no,
and I think that somebody like Draymond, who he has a personal relationship with, and B, you don't have to worry about Draymond's work ethic. You don't have to worry about whether he's
not during the playoffs, at least.
Well, right, but like
seasons.
Well, but how much of that was because the teams were not very good.
They were
nailing it in, because that team was tanking. I think they probably told Draymond to take some of those games off because they were trying to get a better pick. Like, I don't think you can't really talk about that as like an indictment. But like, I think that I would lean towards, as much as like the on paper basketball fit definitely leans towards Simmons.
But the dynamics lean towards Draymond.
Your number one priority as an organization should be keeping Dame happy. And I think that, within reason, drawing the line at hiring Jason Kidd as your head coach.
Yeah.
But
there are limits.
But below that, I would if you could find a way to get Draymond, especially because it wouldn't take CJ to get Draymond.
Like I said, you could do a combination. And honestly, if you're getting Draymond, you'd have to move Covington anyways, because you could and then you would still have the CJ card to play for either to keep those two together, and Neil could talk himself into it being Steph and Clay with Draymond. Yeah.
Even though that's not what it would be, but Neil could talk himself into that. Or, let's say Bradley Beal comes available and wants to be traded, and, you have a chance to use CJ as like a Bradley Beal piece. Then you still have that card to play and you can do that. And then you're really talking, because Bradley Beal is another guy, going back to your original point, is on the Team USA. And this is actually pretty interesting that I've been thinking about this a lot the last couple of weeks since the Team USA roster has
came together
started
real quick.
to come. I mean, yeah, there was the Brian Windhorst story last week about how Dame was like one of the chief recruiters and like trying to get other guys to sign on, and like Jason, like him and Draymond were like talking to Jayson Tatum and Beal and
Jeremy Grant.
That's
a good name to watch.
I mean, he wouldn't be a bad pickup either. I don't think Detroit is really looking to trade him, but like
also they're also resetting with Cade, so it's like,
yeah. So, my thought about this is going to be an interesting Olympics. We know that the Olympics and Team USA stuff has been a huge
political nightmare.
Well, it's been a huge ground for these players, deciding whether we're going to play and teaming up together.
Hint, wink, wink to anybody who's not picking up on what we're saying.
You go back to the 2006 FIBA World Cup. That's Japan.
What set the table.
That was when LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh all like started talking and decided, hey, we should maybe try to align our contract extension so that we can all be free agents the same year and try to play together. A story that I wrote in 2000 I wrote the story last year during the pandemic about the 2010 U.S. national team that won the World Cup in Turkey. And the lasting legacy of that team was that Kevin Durant was on that team. Steph was on that team as a rookie. Iguodala was on that team when he was still in Philly. The three of those guys all became friends. And then when Iguodala was a free agent, he signed with Golden State to play with Steph. And then 2 years later or 3 years later or whatever, those two guys were instrumental in recruiting Durant. So the tampering stuff and like the guys like talking about teaming up and going different places.
KD,
that stuff.
Kyrie, James Harden.
Yeah, well, the other one,
guess what?
These two guys have never actually played together. But for the longest time, Kyrie Irving and Jimmy Butler were like intent on teaming up together. Then those two got tight at the 2016 Olympics in Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, KD and Kyrie, like those are two other guys, from the 2016 Olympics. That was the first time those guys like played together and became friends. And then you obviously saw they went to Brooklyn together. So this could either and this Olympics is going to be so interesting because of the
agency.
Because of the way that like COVID has messed up the whole calendar and the schedule. The Olympics are happening in late July or mid.
We're literally guys are going to start. I mean, once the finals wrap up, guys are gone. Like they're heading in because it's a quasi quarantine in Tokyo.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a full, but
right.
The guys got to get in and get settled in, and so you're going to get this before free agency.
Right. Normally, free agency starts on July 1st,
mm-hmm.
and then by the time the Olympics happen in mid to late July to early August. All the big free agency stuff is already done. All the big trades are already done.
But you could have stuff being done ahead now.
Everybody's kind of on vacation and all the pieces have kind of settled with the offseason. This time, the Olympics where these guys like with Dame and Draymond and Bradley Beal and whoever else, or Zach LaVine, whoever, they're all on this team together. And then when they get back or while they're over there, free agency is happening. And then, the guys are going to try to, move stuff around and get different places and things go that way. So that could either work for the Blazers if Dame really is committed to, hey, I'm going to try to get Draymond to come here. I'm going to try to get Bradley Beal to come here. Or, you could see, Draymond saying, hey, you should come to the Warriors. Or you could see
the darkest timeline is out there.
Like it could really go either way, depending on the conversations that are had, the different trades that are available, how Dame is feeling. Because, I think that there is a chance that Dame could just cool off after a few days. I think
going to Tokyo could be good for him.
I think that after the way the season ended and the way the Denver series ended,
it was never going to be good.
He was pretty upset.
Yeah.
And then I think the way that the last week has played out with all of the backlash to the Chauncey Billups hire and a few fans going at him on Twitter and him having to, deciding to go get defensive on Twitter about his own role in it. I think that's like right now that's flaring up and that's making him look at this like, do I really want to be here? I think everybody, and just to be clear, even if Dame were to ask for a trade, like he could go into Neil Olshey's office tomorrow and say, trade me. Dame's not getting traded this offseason.
No, he's got 4 years left.
4 years left on his deal. None of the good teams can really offer anything close to. Like, do you think like Miami's gonna like Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson?
Let's hit this real quick because
okay,
the packages that you're likely available.
Yeah, you ran some of these by me before we started recording, so I'll just let you go on this.
Yeah, so you're talking about what would be available, and I think the most prominent one. I'll start with probably the most prominent and work our way down.
Mm-hmm.
New Orleans has the most capital that makes sense. Brandon Ingram, young, 6'9" wing, scorer, 23 years old. Lonzo Ball, you get those two together, that makes up the salary. You maybe put something else in there. Then they also have a pile of good draft picks, and because of how many picks they have, they can legitimately, I think, give up to 8 without breaking the Stepien rule. So if you got Brandon Ingram, Lonzo Ball, the Keel Alexander Walker, 5 first-round picks, that's a pretty decent haul. I would go a little bit differently. I think Boston is a team you'd have to look at pairing Dame with Tatum. If Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart, 3 first-round picks, that's probably in line. You're getting a 23-year-old all-star who's
on a pretty good contract.
He's not on a full max. Philadelphia, Simmons, Tybal, Maxey, 3 or 4 firsts. I think obviously Simmons' value is tanked a little bit, so maybe you can extort a few more picks in that regard. Golden State, if they wanted to, Wiseman, Wiggins, 4 firsts.
I don't like that at all.
I don't either, but I'm just looking at like as who's available, who has capital that makes sense. I think Minnesota is probably the other one you could look at. You could go with Anthony Edwards, D'Angelo Russell for the salary plus something else, and probably 4 first-round picks.
Miami would need to put Bam in there.
But yeah, and that's why I think that's a non-starter for them, because I think Bam's one of their core guys. But if they could flip Bam into Dame and Jimmy right now and then basically give a 2, maybe 3-year window and then hard reset, I think you'd have to do it. But let's say it's Bam, Harrow, and 2 firsts. I mean, I think
Bam is the best piece, I think, out of any of the people that
between Bam and Jalen, depending on what you like more.
Yeah.
But I think those are your probable best options. Like Anthony Edwards, D'Angelo Russell, and picks is like, that's your no doubt. You're trading everybody. It's a full hard reset rebuild. So I think you've got some levels to this. I think there's a couple 23-year-old guys that you can target in Jalen and Bam, but that's what you're looking at. There may be other offers out there, but just looking around the league, I think that's probably about the line of what you're looking at. Would you disagree?
The more relevant question when we're talking about the possibility of this happening
is where would where would Dame want to go?
Well, no. I'm not. He has 4 years left on his deal. He hasn't really have any real, ability to
dictate
that.
Yeah.
Do you see any world in which Neil actually would do that?
Only if Dame demanded it publicly. Because
if he
demanded it publicly, then Neil could justify it. He could sell it. That's the only way he could sell it. It couldn't be behind the scenes, because if you trade Damian Lillard without him authorizing it publicly, you're dead. You're a dead man walking.
I think that even if Dame publicly demanded a trade, I think Neil would hold it out as long as possible.
He probably would, but it's the only way
just to prove a point, just to show who's in charge.
I mean, that tracks. There's no doubt about it. But when we're talking about this stuff, like execs and agents and players, they're talking. For the first time in that I have ever heard, that people genuinely think that there's it's a small chance, but there is a chance that he could. But 3 months ago, I would have told you there was a 0% chance that Damian Lillard ever asks out in his prime. Now, maybe 36, 37 years old, he wants to go home and play in Golden State, or go play in Utah, or go play in LA or New York or something. Like, to go get his Dwayne Wade on. Yeah, I think that's different. But we're talking about his prime years. I would have never thought that. Now I think there's an actual chance of it happening, which is a little bit terrifying.
It's entirely the organization's own doing, though. It's entirely Neil Olshey's doing. If that happens, it very easily could have been avoided.
Yeah, and I think that's where the burning frustration comes from. And I think that's where, instead of directing a lot of anger, vitriol, hate, blame at Damian Lillard, it needs to go elsewhere. So we're running up against an hour here now, and I want to get you out of here before it gets too damn late. So, Sean, go ahead and plug anything you're working on, what you got going. Give it all out here.
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter at Highkin, Highkin. That's my Twitter handle. Writing for Bleacher Report. I will be at Neil's press conference on Tuesday, so I could imagine I will have something written from that.
Mm-hmm.
You subscribe to the Bulls vs. Blazers podcast with me and friend of the program, Eric Gunderson.
Shout out, Gundy.
Yeah. And that's about it.
All right. Well, thank you, man. As always, folks, you can find me on social media at Danny Marang, at DANNYMARANG. We will have more. I will get back to the mailbag. Thank you, everybody who got questions in. I will get to them, and I'll kind of bundle the coaching stuff up into this. If we didn't answer it, I'll answer it there. As always, like, rate, review, subscribe across everything, please. It does help grow everything. And again, thank you all so much. We'll catch up next time. Take care. Bye.
Like I'm on my tiptoes, baby. You think a little too small. I got big goals, baby.